Welcome, everybody. We're about a minute away. So happy to have you here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen in the meantime. All right. You should be able to see my screen with a slide there. And take a look to the left. If you're joining us live, you will see a chat icon. So feel free to type into the chat. And I would be curious, actually, to see how was your experience getting into this webinar, and let us know where you are. Where are you located and what is your role? So how was your experience getting here? Where are you located? And what is your role? And a quick reminder, please keep yourself on mute if you're not asking a question. We have a little bit better experience that way with feedback and things like that. All right, we'll wait just another minute for any latecomers, and then we're going to dive right in. All right, looks like Edward says easy access, appraiser, Pennsylvania. Love it. Thank you for that. Amy said easy to get in, North Atlantic, and appraisal help desk management. I love it. Great. Already we've got a variety on here. That's excellent. Folks, we are just past time. So let's get started here. We're here to talk about artificial intelligence and the lending ecosystem, talking about risk, defensibility. What is next? We don't have a crystal ball, but we're going to discuss what we believe is coming next and what we need to all be looking out for in our daily work, and also know what's going on around us in the rest of the lending, mortgage, and valuation ecosystem. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, you should see the slide there just changed if you're trying to figure out your screens. I am Josh Wallet. I am the founder and CEO of Wallet Solutions, and we provide all sorts of consulting services that relate to valuation, compliance, education, review, investigations. We provide services to AMCs, to lenders, to appraisers, to appraisal firms, and even regulators in some circumstances. You can see a little bit about myself. Wallet Solutions is, I would say, all about information and fighting that myth information. And especially in the AI space, I think there's a lot of myth information. There's a lot of misinformation out there, right? So how do we fight that? We fight that with accurate information. That's what we're here today to do. And I'm going to pass it on to Cindy Harris, who is our senior consultant, to allow her to introduce herself.
Thank you. I would say, at the end of the day, I'm an appraiser, certified residential in California and Colorado. And I've been an appraiser for over 30 years and done lots of things in the space, including working within national AMC operations for probably over 15 years, and also having spent a little over a decade, with large lending institutions such as Bank of America and Washington Mutual. But I love this business, and I love the opportunity or the opportunities that we have in front of us. And I think we're going to explore some of those today. So, ready to go.
Excellent. Yes, I'm looking forward to this as well. So just a bit of housekeeping here, if you will. We're here representing ourselves. We're not here representing any sort of board or appraisal standards board, anything like that. We're just representing ourselves. We're not an AMC. We're not soliciting AMC services, and we're not giving legal advice here today. We'll be here today together for about 1 hour. In all of our sessions, we value professionalism. Part of that is, keeping your audio, video, your audio off if to avoid any background noise and things like that. But really, the professionalism emphasis is really, we're all familiar with some online discussion groups or online presentations where it just devolves into whatever people want. We're focused on productive conversation here, and we want you to participate professionally. So if you have questions, ask the questions. That's why we're here. This is not a talking at you. This is a talking with you. And that's what we really value in all of our sessions. I know a lot of you came on today thinking this is going to be great, because what I can do is I can record this. I can play it back at Christmas time, at Thanksgiving, at birthdays. I'm just pulling your leg. You're not going to be doing that. And we ask for no audio or video reproductions. It is being recorded, and you can come back to it anytime in the platform. And you can also share it, and people can obviously attend here. So what are we talking about today? All right. What is AI really changing? Where is it already here? Because it's here. It came fast and furiously, and it is here to stay. Are there risks? Yes. Are there risks we're underestimating? Probably so in some cases, if we don't have our ducks in a row, as they say, and we don't understand fully what's going on. Who owns the governance of this, and what will separate the leaders in this aspect of AI from everyone else? All right. And at its core, AI is about recognizing patterns faster and at greater scale than humans. Now, you heard from Cindy and I, we're both appraisers for background, but we also have AMC experience, lending experience, working with those types of clients as well. So we've seen a lot of different models, and AI is not about taking control away. AI is not about doing thinking for us. It's about harnessing another tool. And just to give a quick illustration of what we mean, if we're convinced that appraisers are somehow using AI to do the thinking for the appraiser, it's kind of a misunderstanding of what's going on. There is guidance out there, and more guidance even being proposed for appraisers. Think of it like an appraiser. Like someone's not on mute. I'm going to go ahead and mute you. Think of an appraiser estimating adjustments or making selections on comps. They're still doing that, but they're not pairing two sales next to each other necessarily. They're saying, hey, AI, can you compare all of these and come to statistically sound conclusions that I can then examine? So it's the same methods and techniques in that space, but on steroids, if you will. So, and that's not a perfect illustration, but I just want to plant that seed initially for sort of the overall context of what you're seeing in lending space and what is happening around you. All right, and that's really what we're talking about. So we anchor ourselves. All right. Not new. Cindy, how long have we seen AI or algorithms, or it's a little hard to define when tech entered AI and when, but how long have we seen sort of this acceleration in AI technology?
Well, I think it's been around for quite some time, just not at the magnitude that we see it today, and just not in the hands of everyone. I think, now we can all have greater access to different tools than we did before. But I think, from an AMC perspective, algorithms have been used for quite some time, right? For modeling, for predictive analysis, for maybe even assignment, things like that, which make a manual process much more efficient, and better decisions can be made. Not saying without risk or without error, but the propensity for making good decisions is increased by using those types of tools.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you know, how can risk regulation and data sort of come together in this sense? Are we going to see greater velocity in identifying risk, and in what spaces? And I know we'll kind of touch on that, but maybe we can kind of set the stage here. How is AI, maybe we could have an example of identifying risk in, maybe I'd say, better, faster, more consistent ways, do you think? Can you think of any kind of off the top of your head, whether it's appraisal reports, whether it's, I mean, a lot of different pieces are out there.
Well, I think if you start maybe more at the investor level, they will have significantly better predictive models around risk, right? So they know what types of products they need to order, what level of review or analysis needs to be done, how they price things. All of those types of models will help them at the risk level there. And similarly at the lender, right? They can use similar modeling around their risk decisions. And then when it comes to an AMC, again, really your risk is around assigning to the best person for each individual order. And doing that manually would be ridiculously difficult. And when you have data to be able to support getting each order to the best appraiser for that order, it makes it significantly faster and arguably better. And for the appraiser, now the appraiser, I think we went from, and this, I don't know, you'll have to tell me if this makes sense or not, but it feels like we went from maybe an HP 12C to really good Excel to now, you know, some other tools that are faster and probably equally as good, if not more sophisticated and better. So at each level, there are tools available, and right now we're talking super high level, but I think they all will help to mitigate risk as long as we're evaluating and validating and consistently improving the models.
I think that's a good point. And, you know, I think of your point with the types of review, the level of review. Does it go to this person? Does it get escalated immediately over to here? Does, you know, what happens with, you know, whether it's, you know, an eval that the lender's using, whether it's an appraisal that the lender's using, whatever type of valuation report. Right now, there are a lot of scoring systems, but it's not necessarily evaluating risk in the way that AI has the potential of evaluating it. You know, AI has a potential of, you know, taking in and digesting all of this data aggregated in some way, and then saying, okay, relative to all of this, here's some risk points, right? Not just, oh, they didn't complete this field, or this field doesn't match what someone else said previously. You know, so right now we're very, very risk and scoring instead of sort of big picture, if you will, in terms of digesting all of that risk. So today we want to look at, you know, how is this all relative or relevant, to lenders, but we also want to give a bigger picture in terms of AMC and appraiser impact. So you understand sort of where that lender sits in relation to all of these other moving parts. So AI is not replacing valuation, but it is redefining how that risk is understood, measured, and defended. So how many here, if you're on here live, if you're on here watching it recorded, you can drop us an email, but live folks, let me know in the chat. So how many of you believe AI is going to significantly change residential valuation in the next 5 years? Let's see in the chat. I see Bob here. I see Lucas here. Michelle. Sherry raised her hand, said yes. Lucas says he does. It's kind of a little bit of a loaded question, right? It's sort of, you know, we're assuming you're going to say yes because it's changing everything all around us, right? And so we were actually joking with a client. They had built an Ask Betty. I am not using her real name, but they had created an Ask Betty AI, and they dumped in all sorts of information that she had collected. And so that's a very simple concept. I see someone on here who uses AI to program and make tools for himself. And so these are the types of things that AMCs are developing. These are the types of things that appraisers are developing. These are the types of things that lenders are also developing. And we have this in our hands even more than previously. We have it accessible to us. So it's not here to do appraisals. All right, that's not, an appraisal is done by a human person. There is still human judgment. All right, but we would want to make sure that in that valuation space, we understand it's being harnessed by the valuers. It's being harnessed on the lender side. It's being harnessed at the AMC side. Has anyone heard of orders being sent out to appraisers? Maybe it's you at your lender. Maybe it's you at your AMC. Maybe it's you receiving this as an appraiser, where it says you cannot use artificial intelligence on this assignment. Has anyone seen that? Has anyone heard that? I would want to caution people, open your mind. Don't start to have policies that are saying you can't, our partners cannot use AI. Let's take a look here. Yeah, Hansel says 5 years is a long time, so it's going to be completely different. Bob says he hasn't heard that. I've seen that. I like to peruse some online discussion groups, a lot of times it's appraiser discussion groups, and there are some where it's saying you can't use AI. Is it I can't use AI in the development stage, in the research and the analysis? Is it I can't use AI to help me write and sum up what was done if I'm still in control of all of this, right? But we don't want to, cut off the legs of our partners and say, here, you can't take advantage of modern technology. All right. So, Cindy, did you want to help demystify AI a little bit so we know what we're talking about and the extreme spectrum, really, of what we're talking about here?
Yeah, sure. When we hear machine learning, and I think I already referred to it in the terms of algorithms in patterns used to make predictions and decisions, typically around risk, maybe escalation paths, things like that. So that's essentially similar, right, to predictive modeling, where you're using statistics to forecast outcomes. Market trends is probably more dangerous than things that are more concrete in nature and more predictable. The natural language processing, I think we're most familiar with that in things like ChatGPT and Perplexity. I mean, there's a ton of them now, but I think that's where you see that the most. And then computer vision's really interesting in our world, because we rely so much on photos to support our conclusions within appraisal reports. If I say a kitchen's been remodeled and what materials were used, having a picture that reflects that is very, supportive. But now you can, AI or image recognition can can help to actually extract those things automatically and put them in your report for validation by the appraiser. And then AVMs. And I distinctly remember back in the early 90s, Bill Rayburn, who was the CEO and one of the founders of FNC, talked about AVMs and how we were all so afraid they were going to take our jobs, and AVMs were going to take over and we wouldn't need appraisals anymore. And here we are decades later, and we still use them, but they have not at all replaced appraisers. And so I think AVMs are a great example of tools that we use, but that do not replace. They have a place in the system, but they can't replace that human analysis and validation. So I know I went through those quickly, but I think everyone essentially understands what most of those things are and how we're using them today. And again, right, AVMs are not new. Machine learning or predictive modeling really isn't new. I think we're just hearing about it more, and it's more tangible to us than it was before.
Yeah, we can really get our hands on it in ways that if someone described that to me 3 years ago, that we'd be here in this type of space, I would have said that sounds kind of crazy. That's more for like the tech people. That's more for the specialists. And now it's like anyone and everyone. I literally had an Excel spreadsheet I've used for decades in the field as a field appraiser to analyze my market, because I'm in a small market. No technology company wanted to map our data ever. It wasn't worth their time. And I have now, in a weekend, I worked with AI and it built a web-based interface to mimic what I had already designed, a decade ago. That's crazy. Now, if you are not an appraiser on here, one of the biggest changes in the valuation space, Cindy hit on when she talked about computer vision, and she used the word validate. So the role of your appraisers who you work with is not necessarily collecting everything in the same way anymore, or typing things in the same way, or writing things up and summarizing things. It will be able to say, it looks like a 2-car garage. Oh, but maybe the appraiser knows that one of those is tandem. So I'm putting 3, I'm fixing it. I'm validating it. But the AI knew from looking at a 2-car garage, it's most likely, or the bay door, that it's a 2-car garage. Or that like perfect example with Cindy talking about the kitchen, remodeling, all of the, it can talk about the materials. And so have any of you heard of the UAD 3.6? We're not going to get into it. I don't want to change the subject here, but it asks for a lot more questions. But in fact, if your appraiser partners are using up-to-date technology, they don't actually have to fill in a lot of that themselves, at least when the bells and whistles catch up. They will be able to validate and say, yes, it was vinyl flooring, it was carpet, it doesn't look like it's been updated, I agree with that, and so on and so forth. So, again, are we restricting the use of it? We might have some boundaries, but we don't want to hold back anyone in this ecosystem, because everything's going to move past us if we're part of a team that's holding others back. Whoops.
I think Hansel made a good comment here that a lot of appraisers are still thinking of AI in terms of the Chat GPT prompt terminal and aren't aware of the larger world of AI, where these tools can be connected to the entire universe of platforms, where you can review data across a large number of systems. That's a very good point.
That is a really good point. And Hansel, if any of you want to geek out on AI, Hansel's the guy. I know he can take me saying that. So I'm it's awesome to talk with him about AI and how in each person's hands we can harness this. It's not high level anymore. It's down to everybody. So automation, this simple automation we're not talking about intelligence necessarily. Augmentation doesn't mean replacement. So this is, think of augmenting, think of supplementing what we do, but the computer is not in charge. The appraiser, the loan officer, the risk manager, the underwriter, the quality control, the chief appraiser, they're in charge of that. All right. So artificial intelligence is, just as we said earlier in that red statement that we had, that core statement, pattern recognition at a scale. So I can take a look at indexes as a quality control person. I can say, well, is it truly stable like this valuation report says? Am I worried that that isn't right? Let me look up this index. Let me pull this up. We have something integrated where it shows this index. I can do all of that manually, or I can have an AI that says, let me look at the patterns coming in from other valuation reports. Let me look at these indexes. Let me consolidate this together and give a story to the underwriter or to that risk manager and say, okay, we have a full picture here. So rather than manually collecting all that data, we have something that can collect it all together and give us some supported conclusions that then we harness to take the next step and make our decisions, right? And that's that context judgment where, we're still offering something. We're still offering something. Cindy, do you think, with the fear that we see out there, what do you think the lender offers in terms of their human judgment still? Like, where do we, I don't want to say draw the line, because the line moves depending on what tools we're using, of course, but can you think of ways where that quality control person or that underwriter or that chief appraiser, where they're still applying their judgment, even though AI might be involved from A to Z in their whole process? I mean, what is that human piece?
Well, we'll just assume we have a lender that is, their investor is either Fannie or Freddie. And so in that case, they'll have collateral underwriter, I think it's LCA from Freddie, and they'll have those tools to use in their decision making. They'll have, rep and warrant delineations. So they'll be able to use all of those things in their decision making process. And I'm guessing, that each lender has some sort of guideline that they follow, but those are the tools that they would use, because there are data points there that are going to suggest the risk level of the appraisal. And then they use their own, contextual judgment and looking at it in conjunction with the tool.
That's a good way. That's a good way to say it. I'm putting a takeaway in the chat because I like to kind of take notes as I go with anything. Continue to use your human judgment. That's very different to artificial intelligence. All right. Artificial intelligence gets us, through step 7, and then we take steps 8, 9, and 10, or, obviously illustration there. So I think we're going to have different groups, and you need to decide which group you're going to be in. Are you going to be in the group that resists AI entirely within your right? You might not be able to avoid it because different systems, even your MLS may have some AI built in at some point, or even your loan systems may have AI built into them. They probably do at this point. But we have the resist group and we have the accept group, but then we have this other accept but non-critical thinkers. And we need to still be a critical thinker. All right. So we're not here to use AI to make all of our underwriting decisions, right? The human's still making that underwriting decision. It's just, there's a lot more tools. There's a lot more insight being offered there. So you need to decide which group are you in.
Yeah, even at the AMC, Josh, I think they have automated quality control tools, but those essentially will help put that quality control process on an escalation path, right? It's good. It needs secondary judgment, or it needs escalated judgment, maybe from an appraiser or someone with a slightly higher skill set. So that's just another another way, right? An escalation system as well.
Yeah, and I think too, I always, when we talk about these types of aspects, think of, that's a great example of how at a lender or an AMC AI is harnessed. But I always think of like all the participants, right? And so I know we have some appraisers listening to this. We also have scoring in some of the appraisal software, and it's, oh, hey, I'm going to reduce revisions on a. There's also the ability to say, hey, AI, you're a risk manager, you're an underwriter. And if we know the confidentiality and security policies of what the AI we're using, we might be able to get some feedback and say, well, you're contradictory here. Well, nothing is scoring that in your software. They're not scoring contradictions. It's just solid rules, black and white. Could I use AI in that way, right? And so again, as a lender, we don't want to be restricting our partners, because it could actually benefit the lender to a great degree by, hey, they might be proactive in evaluating their own work to say, oh, I need to write more about that, right? I need to give more context. I need to give more explanation. So then if you're an appraiser on here or listening, think about, be creative. Be creative. How could a super duper fast assistant be helpful to you? Because it's really what we're talking about. All right. So AVMs, hybrid valuations, we see that already. Collateral risk scoring, we've talked about some of this. Fraud detection. Remember that we're talking about artificial intelligence looking for patterns that on a very large scale, to where a human, it would be extremely difficult and time consuming for a human to find those. But is the lender harnessing this to say, what's going on in this subdivision? Do we notice anything different here? Oh, hey, 90% of the valuations are being done by a certain person. Is that risky? Why is that happening? Is our AMC really finding the most qualified person, or are they just giving it to one person? So maybe there's fraud there, maybe there's risk there, maybe there's nothing, but it can pinpoint and assist a human to look further, right? QC automation, escalating, right? Okay, this is good, no red flags at all, nothing worrisome. It can proceed this way. We have another road for the others to go down. Appraisal review tools, repurchase risk modeling. Cindy, you've worked, I know you started at a lender, right? You started as an appraiser at lender, and you've worked at lenders and AMCs. Where do you think, if you had to choose one of these, where do you think lenders are currently maybe finding the biggest lift? And that may be an impossible question.
No, I don't think it is. I'm going to go back again to GSE, right? So if your investor is Fannie or Freddie, they provide you with significant tools and rep and warrant, so that when it comes to repurchase risk, they've done that modeling and they give it back to you and say, here's where you're at with this. Now, so for a non-GSE investor, then either they have their own type of risk modeling or requirements, and a lender who's not delivering to the GSEs may have different things that they need to satisfy for those particular investors. But you would have some sort of risk tool that you would use. And they may outsource for that, outsource some sort of report that's issued from running it through some type of model.
I think of also, as you're describing this, I think of the portfolio
yes.
monitoring, the risks associated with that, whole packages. You can see whole, entire portfolios being sold, and all of really, again, we've had limited analytics on the lending side. I mean, in the current space, if we took AI out, we still have some good analytics there, but it's, again, very rule-based and things like this. You go back 30, 40 years, it was, who knows what's in this? We're just taking everyone's word for it. Well, now we've gotten to the point, the other end of the spectrum, that actually we have a really big way to look at this and know for sure where the risk is. So, okay. Lender value versus risk. So yes, we can be more efficient. Well, safe. I like the word on the slide better, actually. We can be faster, because efficient isn't the same thing. Efficient takes into account some of the risks as well, which we'll look at. Reduced repurchase exposure, right? We can be a little smarter about which ones may trigger this type of recourse. Scalable reviews, putting our focus where it needs to be. I know Cindy especially works with lenders, agents as well. That's a lot of her space. We work with AMCs and appraisers, but she really brings a very good flavor to working with lenders and agents. So we're talking lenders here mostly. The benefits of having scalable reviews, and putting the effort, the time, the staff on what makes sense to review, or deeper reviews, or lighter reviews, and pushing it through because there's nothing really to look at in certain senses. Audit defensibility to show what went on. And I think too, and maybe you can speak to this, Cindy, but I think of almost, I don't want to say it's an impossible task, because many lenders and AMCs do it. But when the regulator says, we want to see how you chose that appraiser, that's a really good, because we've got lenders here, we've got AMCs here. They both have that same, different regulators, but they all may say the same thing when they're looking. It's a really big ask, and that's a big challenge in policies for AMCs and lenders, where, how do they explain it? How do they? Well, if you have some AI lift there saying, well, we looked at, everyone within 10 miles of this property, or, whatever, and they have maybe a first step, and it's the aid to that appraisal department employee. Now they can say, okay, sum it up. You narrowed it down to these 3 people because of this criteria that matches our policies. Well, now the human just needs to say why they chose between those 3. And I'm not here telling you that that's the policy in a nutshell. Obviously, there's a lot more details to look at to be compliant. But Cindy, I mean, you've been on that side a lot. Have you seen it both ways? Have you seen the human only challenge, and then have you seen some analytics and AI will run with it?
Yes, and the human only raises a lot of challenges, because it's not as defensible. How do you go back and recreate exactly what they were thinking at that time, exactly what was available for them? So you'd almost need a screenshot, right, of what they saw at the time they made the decision, and they may have to add some sort of statement about why they made that decision, versus if you're using an automated assignment method, you can still capture what was available then, but you can do a lot of predictive modeling around that to show every time we put this in, this is the result we get. And we can see this appraiser, all of this appraiser's stats around performance, and also their capacity at the time. So all of that is seen in real time and captured as defensibility around why the model made that decision. Versus if you think about the time it takes from a manual perspective to do that, it's kind of ridiculous.
Right. Yeah. Looking up, okay, who has done at least 3 manufactured house appraisals in our system? Oh, not enough in that area. Okay, let me go back down to 2. And now, that they always take 3 weeks and they go dark. And then it's really difficult to, it just, all these things, snap your finger, and you have something reporting the results to you in an organized, some conclusions way, and then that human makes the decision. So I love that. Thanks for that context. The risks, of course, are black box decisioning, but some of that can be worked around by saying, lay out what you looked at and how you came to these sort of scoring or rankings or whatever, or why you thought it was high risk and needed this level of review, or all these different types of activities we're talking about.
Compare that to a work file. Compare that to an appraiser's work file, right? Like similar thought process. The work file is there to support the conclusions. Although if you talk about 3.6, more of that is in the actual report. But I think it's a similar thought.
Yes. And do we get? I'm taking this fourth bullet point here on the right hand side. I lean towards a little over reliance sometimes sometimes I just need to step back and say, Josh, just think for yourself, right? Like we can easily fall into a trap of always turning, let me plug this in, let me ask it this. It's like, well, we still need the capacity to think. I know we were talking and about an article, I think, or something, and we were like, well, we're not going to use AI on this. These are our own thoughts. There's certain times you just rule it out and you just say, I need to think. And so we're definitely not foreseeing all thinking gone. As a matter of fact, we're talking about a better level of thinking because the data is being pinpointed to us. Okay. So this is a question for you to think of, and you can type in the chat if you like, or just kind of bring it back to your leadership, bring it back to your team. Are you using AI to reduce costs or to strengthen defensibility? We've given you a few examples of where that could be used. Think about, okay, and Diane says both. Good. All right. Thank you, Diane. And Chuck says yes, both as well. Good. It has great potential. You need to think it through. And I don't believe that everybody on here and everybody listening to this is in charge of making these decisions, but we have to think of it in that way. This isn't we need to look at those pros and cons, I guess is what I'm trying to say, and understand the whole process. What are we trying to achieve? And then also, what are our challenges in using it, right? So some of the things we already talked about, AI and the AMC, or we might think of AI and the appraisal department, however you approach it in your organization, right? Panel scoring and tracking, turn time predictions. It isn't necessarily from every appraiser turn time predictions. It might be, but it might also be, are you letting your client know that this will likely take 2 weeks? Historically in this area for this type of property, things like this. Different assignment logic, fee modeling, compliance scanning is another. Fee modeling, you need a lot of support there, right? If your regulator comes in and takes a look at you. Mm-hmm. All right. Oh yeah, go ahead, Cindy.
Sorry, no, I was just going to say a quick note on your turn time prediction. So to your point, that's an excellent point, that in some markets, there's an extended turn time due to maybe low density population, fewer appraisers, all those types of things. But this then allows the experience to improve, because now the lender knows, maybe the loan officer knows, the consumer knows. When everyone knows what the expectation is, it's a much better experience for everyone. And so to me, that seems really simple, but it can be really important to how someone experiences their getting their loan, because they knew what to expect and they didn't think they were going to have it in 2 days and it was 2 weeks, sort of thing.
Right. Setting expectations. Mm-hmm. And we all like to think something's going to be faster, but if you have an analytical tool saying, look, we've crunched all the data here, all the factors, the area, the property type, the uniqueness, the size, the appraisers in this area and their past performance, all of this, why are you going to argue with that and then tell a fib to the client and say, oh yeah, I can get it to you in 3 days, right? I mean, setting expectations is much better. But it's harder to do if you don't have those analytics, and it's harder to do if you don't have something that can crunch the analytics for you. And that's really what we're talking about. Some insight, right? Some better insight. How are you? I just want to, we're not going to stop, but I want to see in the chat, how are you using AI now? Specifically, what types of role? Sometimes we think of role as a person's role, but we're talking what role at your lender, at your AMC, at your appraisal firm, depending on who you are, what role is AI taking on? All right, we've looked at some lender examples. We're trying to give a little bit more context around the AMC or appraisal department. And next, we're going to move to a little context around the appraiser as well, but we're primarily focusing on lender here. So efficiency versus differentiation, quality considerations. All right, and am I still, I might have frozen there. I don't know if I did or not.
You did.
I did. Okay, I'm back. Well, didn't miss much. Sorry about that, folks. I wasn't sure if it was me or someone else that was frozen. But all right, let's give a little bit of context around what appraisers are doing. If you're a lender, if you're a loan officer, if you're a chief appraiser, if you're a QC person, if you might, not in an insulting way, but you might be a little bit out of touch with what happens in an appraiser space now. Maybe you do have experience, but it's 10, 15 years old. Maybe you have no experience, and it's always been a challenge knowing what appraisers do. Well, now it's even harder because things are up in the air and changing. So comp selection, can AI rank? Well, we've always had some rankings there, but now we have something saying, hey, I read the comments and I looked at the characteristics, and this is why this one might be a good comp. The appraiser makes that decision, but it can sort of pre-explain. Again, it's like having that trainee perhaps, or an analyst next to the appraiser saying, hey, here's a helping hand. Regression analysis, regression analysis scares appraisers sometimes, but did you know you can use AI to run some very, very sophisticated algorithms and equations to actually identify which are the most likely characteristics to put into a regression model. So not even building it, but helping to pre-build, and then the appraiser fine-tunes it, right? Market trends, drafting the commentary, meaning they read it over and edit it, right? No one's suggesting the AI just submits the report. Photo recognition we talked about. Less clerical work, faster synthesis, faster connecting of everything, and more, and I would say consistent analysis. And I don't know what you think, Cindy, but there have been over the past 5 to 10 years, a lot of criticism and examination of the appraiser profession, and having consistent analysis is important to be able to show I treat every assignment in the same broad stroke steps. It's not going to be identical, of course, but add to that if you have any thoughts on that.
Yes, I will. And then also, Hansel had said, is the larger market putting more faith in the technology than appraisers want to put into it? And so I think that's interesting in itself. And my soapbox around this topic really is that these tools for appraisers, along with the new appraisal report, will elevate the profession, because we'll have consistency, we'll have standardization. The output of what the appraisal looks like, the readability, the increased credibility and defensibility are just going to make the profession more valuable, more, we'll be able to differentiate in a way that we don't today. And I think the things that give everyone pause around the inconsistency in appraisal can all be improved by leveraging these tools for just that word, right? For consistency's sake, and making it easier for the user to ingest and not have so many questions about what they're looking at. They'll be able to read it and understand it versus say, I don't understand this. We have to send it back, and this back and forth, back and forth. I think we can eliminate not all of it, but a whole lot of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. And Bob says here, so I guess my takeaway from Hansel and from your response is we have to enter this with open eyes. And how many of us go to the doctor and they're using an abacus to figure our bill, or they're using a typewriter to type something up, or they're coming into the room with a tablet, and that's what we expect. I would be very surprised to go into a doctor's office and not, but and so we have to explore this, right? As practitioners, we have to explore and accept change and learn about it. Bob says, for me, it makes me a better communicator, making sure I reference the right section of the selling guide or the handbook. I love that. Right. Can you check my work, AI? Right. Make sure I've done this, make sure this makes sense and things like this. So appraisers are worried about commoditization. But I think, Cindy, you've hit on a lot of, it's about differentiation. It's about showing how the appraisal product, and I know some people don't like that term, but users tend to think of products. The appraisal product is more valuable than a pure machine product. And there's a place for those, right? Very low risk, very, a lot of data. I accept that. There's a place for those. But differentiating, what does an appraiser add to this, right? That's where it is. So clear expectations, more defensibility in terms of market data, being able to crunch the data and navigate the data and have everything data-based, or most things data-based. There's still that place for human judgment, of course. It's imperfect data. But I think that has come about, and oftentimes it was called scope creep. I don't disagree that it might be report creep or scope creep, but it's also reflective of changing expectations that we see in every profession out there. So it might not be the answer everyone wants to hear, right? But that is what it is. Lenders, if you're a lender sitting on here, you're probably thinking, yeah, I expect to really understand the full story. And I expect to think of the appraisal report as a story, not as a mystery novel, though. Okay, let's touch on governance and compliance. Model risk management, explainability requirements, bias mitigation. We touched on some of these. It's as if we knew what these slides were beforehand. Documentation expectations, vendor oversight. Cindy, do you want to hit on this slide a little bit? Give us a little bit more context for this in what lenders should be looking out for and expecting within their organization?
Yeah, I think really the fourth bullet point kind of nails it, and that's the documentation expectation. Every type of tool or process should have documentation, and that documentation would include the validation, right? And all of the probably very complicated explanation that I might not understand personally, but that would satisfy that they know and understand and have validated through maybe an outside source that all of these things work as they should. And then vendor oversight is really important, especially for a lender that's using an AMC or a firm or some outsourced provider, that they need to ensure that all of the methodology and tools that they're using are validated and that those processes are followed. And so all of that comes back to documenting internally the vendor oversight. And I think a lot of times that's done on an annual basis, but depending on the regulator for the lender, you would base that oversight accordingly. So some of it is more stringent than others.
Okay.
Like a Bank of America would be different maybe than a smaller local bank, perhaps.
So
Right.
we've got to scale it and make it appropriate for, yeah. Okay. Okay, good. So let's take a look at some implications at the lender side. Well, really all of the roles, but where are we going with this? Appraisers, a lot of appraisers may think of themselves as, well, I go visit properties. That may be true, but really appraisers are risk interpreters. AMCs are managing the process. That's where their value is. And then the lenders are governing the data. All right. They're harnessing that data that's been summed up in these valuation packets essentially given to them so they can make good decisions. Do you want to take the second half there?
Sure. Well, so where we need to go with that, and what I see right in the role evolution first is just for appraisers, it's elevating the profession. For AMCs, it's taking out some of the nuisance, if you will, right? Because we're delivering a product that's more standardized, so there's less of that back and forth type situation. And then for how we need to evolve as a workforce really is getting used to these AI tools or data modeling, and just being able to understand them and practice and work with them and ask questions and maybe take some courses. There are tons of them available these days. And then recognize that over reliance, right, can't happen. We need to continue to be critical in our thinking. And then I also think this is a humongous opportunity for collaboration, since there's so much change going on in this space, and in particular valuation. It is an excellent time to talk with each other. And we've kind of, with the advent of AMCs and Dodd-Frank, we came to this place where we think we can't talk to each other anymore. And it's just not true. People can't influence, coerce, blackmail appraisers. We get that, right? That's pretty simple, but we can still talk and collaborate and share information and understanding. So I really hope that we can break down some of those walls through this time.
That's a good point. Continue to encourage communication. Yeah. And so transparency, talking about use of AI and how it's being harnessed, right? It's not a secret, right? It's not something that we need to squirrel away. Explainability and trust. And I'll let you take the winners part.
Okay. Well, so I think that really, I've said a few of these things already, but walking through this new period with open eyes, open mind, and just being willing to learn, because all I see is opportunity. I don't see anything negative other than change is not always fun, right? It can be difficult. And if you liken it to something like a marathon, the training is definitely not always fun, but crossing the finish line is. And so I think anything that's really good can sometimes be hard or a little challenging to get there, but it's worth it. So I think we'll all win if we can look forward to elevating and improving the things we do in our standards. It's not decreasing it. We can participate in this and not have this done to us. That's our decision. It's a growth mindset. A growth mindset will allow you to come out of this in a much better place.
I like that. Yes. Participate instead of having something thrust upon you. Yes, you are an active participant. Okay, so we're about time. We can of course stay a few minutes. If you're able to stay a few minutes, please do. Any questions, or maybe you've faced some concerns? It would be great to chat. But let's think about this. Where are you already using it? We got a little feedback on that. What are your concerns? Accuracy, bias, explainability, depend. So where, in other words, where are some of your pain points? Where are some of the policies and procedures you have in place right now where you say, well, this is how we verify the accuracy of data. This is where we evaluate whether there's any bias in. But is it hard to explain how you do it? Maybe that is a place where there could be a lift, right? So, and how do you measure quality improvement? Cindy, can you give us an example of how folks might measure quality improvement? How might that look in a lending organization?
So you can look at quality improvement through overall quality scores, revision rates, for if you're a lender or a GSC, right, it's going to be, you're going to measure up on repurchase request, or maybe your rep and warrant score. I think there are lots of metrics that you can use to measure quality improvement. And drill down significantly, right, to you need to look at it by market almost, but you can show overall, but then very specific areas where you might struggle and be able to show improvement.
Nice. Good point. Good point. Okay. So obviously a very high overview, right? There's a lot to this. This is a really deep topic, so to speak. You can see that when you start looking at one part of your protocol, it's going to just web out into, well, what about this? Well, what about this? Well, that impacts this. Well, downstream, we have this. So, take it bite by bite, but let's remember this is happening and your competitors are using it. If you're not, they definitely are. Commoditization is optional, right? We can be looked at as providing a product. Yes, people may continue to call it that, but is it something that's offering more than just a flat product? Are we helping make decisions? All right. Governance, non-negotiable. Relevance, that's up to you. Cindy, do you have some final thoughts as well? I don't see any questions coming through on the chat, but we did have a good comment from Chuck.
Yes, and I really agree with that. And because AI can become a habit, sort of, right? Where you forget that you need to understand the sources and validate, does this actually make sense?
Right.
So we definitely can't forget that, but just don't forget that it's enhancing our capabilities and increasing our overall professionalism and output.
Yes, for sure. And we do want to, and Chuck's statement was, we need to ensure we do not lose our critical thinking skills, which is what Cindy was replying to. And I think that is critical. But did want to thank you. If you do have any final questions, type them in and we'll address those. We want to also thank ValueLink for helping to sponsor and to bring this out to folks and get the word out. Thanks so much. We will continue the series. Look out for other communications. If you think any of your colleagues would benefit from this type of series, go ahead and share it. It's no expense to you. We'd love to have you join in this type of presentation and discussion. So thanks very much, everybody. Have a good day out there.
Thank you.